persimmons are ripening. I didn't grow up with persimmons around where I lived. I guess they're not so common here. In Japan, they're very common. I think also in China, there's kind of wild persimmon. And this time of year, as the leaves start to fall, the persimmons are turning more and more orange. So this beautiful sight of this rich orange color of the persimmon that's emerging just as the world is dying. In a good way. Dying. All the leaves coming down, going to rest, maybe going to sleep. And that transition always feels very meaningful to me this time of year. And I have a habit of talking about the season a little bit before we start to talk, and that's mostly just because it's on my mind, but also to encourage you to pay attention to that. There's always something being taught to us through this season. Even at the very height of the season, there will be a little bit of a movement, like in the height of the summertime. Do you notice that? It gets very hot, it's been dry for a long time, maybe it's July, and if you pay attention, there'll be this slight change in the air. Happens right at like the hottest, kind of most dry time. This year was a little different because we had that hot a little bit earlier, and then it was hot, but not hot like it was earlier. But right at that time, you can feel there's this little shift. And that's true in the world there that we call the weather, but the weather of our own being, our bodies, our minds, our hearts, the same dynamic is happening there. So if you pay attention to that, mostly it's just very enlivening. The orange persimmons start to have a meaning that you can't quite explain, but they're important. It's why, if you're lucky to live a place like in the Northeast where the leaves turn crimson, here we don't have quite that same effect. Ours kind of go yellow usually, but that there's something important about that. My wife and I, we oftentimes this time of year, she's in Japan right now, so we went a little earlier this year, but we go out to this creek that's on the way to the ocean. Actually, it's a Sayusla, I believe, a branch of that river, and we watch the crawdads. So, crawdad is a lot like a persimmon. They get very red this time of year. And if you watch them in the water doing their very strange little life, I don't mean littler than our life. they're very strange life there, beating up on each other and just being so red against the dark rocks and the clear water. You'll know something that you don't know if you haven't paid attention to that crawdads. That's what we call them. What else we call them? Crayfish? Crayfish? Yeah, we always call them crawdads. Anyway, okay, enough of that. So this morning I'd like to talk a little bit about this practice of making offerings to the hungry ghosts or to the preta. October is an important time for us at Buddha Eye Temple because we concentrate on this practice, but actually this practice of nourishing or making offerings to hungry ghosts or preta is happening all the time in the temple practice. On a daily basis, we do an abbreviated form of the ritual that we do in a longer form of throughout the month of October that then culminates in the ritual called osegaki, which means like big segaki or big assembly of making offerings to the hungry ghosts. And that this year will happen, I believe it's November 3rd. We always do it the Sunday that's closest to Halloween. And so this time of year, we tend to talk about this practice, and we talk about the practice in terms of its relationship to that particular ritual of osegaki that we do as a whole assembly. But I want to emphasize today a little bit that actually this is the reason there is that one day in the year where we do it in this kind of a very big, colorful way, is because that helps us understand what it means to do this practice day after day, not just ritually, but also what is the orientation of our day-to-day life. The rituals that we engage in relationship to this all are there for the purpose of orienting us in practice. They're orienting us in life. And so there's a continuity to this, whether you're a person who really takes up the ritual practice or not. There's a teaching in this ritual, not just a conceptual teaching, but a teaching about how is our fundamental orientation in life that is really valuable, and I would say deeply important, particularly to the Mahayana life, to the life of the great vehicle. Now, we use the term practice in Western Buddhism a lot, and there's this emphasis in practice on the idea that, like, I kind of know what I'm doing. I'm going to meditate, for example. Most people who coming to Buddhism, at least to Zen Buddhism in the West, are interested in meditation. That makes sense. That's a central, if not the central practice of our school. So that's wonderful. But there's a kind of a imbalance in the way that we think about it, because we kind of think we know what meditation is. Even if we know we don't know what it is, we kind of pretend like we know what it is. Like it's a 40-minute period of time in which I don't move. And even if I'm not thinking that conceptually, there's a way in which my way of regarding the practice of meditation will take on a kind of narrow conception. The way that we're thinking about what we're doing becomes kind of narrow, becomes marked by the idea that I'm doing it. And it becomes a lot like going to the gym, right? Or brushing our teeth. Now, there's a side to that's really important. Sometimes I refer to it as mental floss, right? We don't have enough mental floss, and we're eating a lot of junk food, like constantly. The level of input that we have now is really, really over the top. So one side of meditation, which is a little like go to the gym and stay, get your exercise in, is like a, through the ears, and you're just cleaning out a little bit. Okay, I'm making fun of it or making a joke about it, but it's really important. Without doing that, actually, the other sides of meditation will never really deepen. Right? So you need that. You need it. But my point here is that we tend to have a narrow perspective, thinking that's what meditation is. That's sort of the sum of it, as opposed to that is one of the parts of meditation, or it's an aspect of meditation that helps something else unfold. And so I like to think not just about practice as in something we do. I like to think about and talk about orientation, or what is our regard for things. You see the difference there? Practice is about, like, what am I going to do? And maybe what are the effects of that? Right? Not unimportant, but there's something more primary, which is what is your regard for life? What is your regard for other beings? What is your regard for different aspects of yourself? What's your orientation to it? Because that is going to really be the defining layer of how it is that you're going to experience things. What you're doing is important, but what you do comes from your regard. The way that you think about it, the way you perceive it, the things that you are magnetized to, the things that you're repulsed by, etc. That will all come from that layer that's more fundamental than simply your doing. And so myth, legend, story, these are all, I think of as very positive words. Sometimes people think they use myth in a sort of negative way, like, oh, it's a myth. I don't mean it that way. I mean, they're really true. Myths are true. They're not necessarily true in a historical way or an empirical way, but they have a truth that they are teaching. Legends, stories, they all help us work with the layer of our being which is more fundamental than our doing is. And so when we're engaging the Buddhist practice, to take the time to listen to these legends, to enact the rituals, and let them work through us, and shift the way it is that we are regarding things, our orientation in life. This is really an important aspect of the path. And these stories have a way of telling us not just what to pay attention to, but how to pay attention. So there's an aspect which is what, but there's an also aspect which is how. How do I pay attention to this very pesky business of being greedy? What's my regard for that? In the same way that legends help to orient us, cosmology also does as well. And so in this case, cosmology, I just mean kind of what is a Buddhist view of how this whole business is organized, right? And so, of course, Buddhism has its own way of explaining where are we, how did the world come about, and all those kinds of things. One of the aspects of cosmology within Buddhism is this teaching that there are 6 basic realms in which beings are born into and reborn into. And one of those realms is the human realm. Welcome. And it's considered a very favorable realm. Actually, it's considered the most favorable realm, which is kind of cool in Buddhism. The value of human life is really put central, but it's not the highest. So maybe the most fortunate is not the highest. That's a trip, you know. That's not usually how we think of the most fortunate, right? The highest is the divine realm, or the heavenly realms, right? Where beings have unimaginably long lifespans, live in great pleasure and forgetfulness. So that's a really great place to be reborn in the sense of its capacity for pleasure and contentment. One of the highest of those heavens, not the very highest, but one of the highest is known as the heaven of complete contentment. Doesn't that sound pretty good? Yeah. And that's where the Buddha was living before he was born in this world. That's called the Tushita heaven, the heaven of total contentment. And then took incarnation into this world, which is known as the world of suffering. Seems like a demotion, right? And in a way it is, but actually the understanding is that's what's necessary for a Buddha, because a Buddha doesn't seek to live in the highest place. The Buddha seeks to unlock the suffering of all beings in all realms. And so a birth in a human incarnation allows us to encounter something that's very hard to encounter in the divine realm, where there's a forgetfulness about the suffering of existence because there's so much contentment. Another one of the realms is called the Asuras, or sometimes translated as the angry gods, or the ogres, or the titans. They're divine beings that are no longer in the divine realm. They've fallen down to the lower realms of the divine realm, and they're ticked off about it. Right? So they want to get back in. Right? There's a realm of animals, hell realm, and then the realm of the hungry ghosts. Each of these realms have their characteristics. The human realm is defined by greed, but overall is seen as a realm where greed is put to use in a positive way. Humans try to make things better. We try to make stuff work. And that's generally speaking positive. Our closest neighbors in this transmigration are the hungry ghosts. And we share a very intermingled world with them. The hungry ghosts are also marked by greed, but their greed is a greed of self-clinging. So the old word for it would be mean. They're mean. Mean in this case, not meaning that they're just like do unkind things to other people, but that they hoard. They keep for themselves and don't want others to have it. And all of the warnings in the classical teachings about hungry ghosts are about that. Not just simply greed. Just simple greed has its own problem, or just like insatiable appetite. I don't know. You probably know nothing about that, right? But that's a facet of it. But the real kicker is, I want all the ice cream for myself. I don't want Jesse having any ice cream. Actually, I do. But that part of me that's like that, you know that part of yourself. What is that? It's so strange. Like, it kind of makes sense when you're in a situation of not enough, right? That you would do that. Like when it's really like only one person gets the ice cream, right? But if you watch carefully, that's not when it's most active. In that situation, actually, usually dies down, in my experience. Giving it to someone else becomes relatively easy. But somehow, when we're in a realm of plenty, say, for example, if you were in the richest country that the world has ever known. Yeah. For example, how could that meanness arise in your heart? But I don't think there's a lot of places that probably have that level of meanness that we experience here, even among plenty. So it's not just that we don't have enough, that's why we want to keep it for ourselves. There's something else at work there, and Buddhism calls that out as the quality of the hungry ghost, that there's a whole realm of those beings. And you can think about that any way you want to. If it's helpful, you think about it as psychological realms. If it's helpful for you to think about it as spiritual realms, metaphorical realms, whatever suits you is the place to work with it. And then you may find that other aspects of it start becoming important to you too, other aspects of ways of understanding those realms. So this constant kind of hold it for myself, I should be the one who has it, in the exception to others. What do we do with that? Because it is kind of the closest danger in the human realm. It's the place where we create unimaginable suffering for ourselves and for others. Okay? It's maybe the basic facet of our isolation. The basic pivot, the basic pivot of our isolation, of my aloneness. So in the legends, there's this legend of Ananda, who was one of the closest, if not the closest disciple to the Buddha, at least in terms of his physical proximity. He was there by the Buddha's side throughout all of his teaching. And there's a legend about Ananda's encounter with these hungry ghosts. And it comes in a sutra or in a teaching referred to as the Dharani of refuge for the Preta flaming mouth, or the Dharani for the refuge for the hungry ghost, burning mouth or flaming mouth. Now, a Dharani is a kind of incantation, is a kind of a ritual speech which has a certain kind of power. I'm going to talk about that more later. Today, I want to talk more about the legend itself. What is Ananda getting into here? So it's not a really long story, but the basic framework of the story is Ananda and the Buddha in a great assembly of renunciates and non-renunciate practitioners have gathered together in Kapilavastu, which is one of the central places that the Buddha taught, and he's giving them teachings. And one night after the teachings have finished, Ananda goes off by himself, and he's contemplating what the Buddha has taught. And it's said that as he's sitting there quietly, this being appears. And the being is very striking. It's large, has very disheveled, kinky hair, wild eyes, very, very thin neck, and a bloated belly. And every time it breathes, there's fire coming out of its mouth. Nails are long. It's kind of covered in filth. And so Ananda sees this being and says, who are you? And the being says, I am Enku. I am Flaming Mouth, the king of the hungry ghosts. Because he's Ananda, it's not just any old hungry ghost that's going to show up. It's going to be the top. And Enku says to Ananda, in 3 days you will lose your life and you will fall into my realm. I'm here to deliver that message. And Ananda says, well, why? And Burning Mouth says, it is your karma. So it has to do with something about the life stream of Ananda that he's headed in that direction. And Ananda says, is there nothing that I can do? And Enku says, no. And Ananda says, are you sure? Is there some way that I could overcome this karma? And Enku says, there is one way, but it's impossible. You have to feed me, and you have to feed every hungry ghost in the realm of the hungry ghosts, which are more numerous than the number of grains of sand on the banks of the Ganges River, which is one of these great rivers of the world. Yeah. So if you think about, that's how many hungry ghosts there are. He says you have to feed them all. And furthermore, you also have to feed all of the noble ones, all of the seers, all the Brahmins, all of the sages that live in the mountains. And then you have to, on top of that, make an offering on our behalf to all of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. If you could do this, then you would be freed, and we would be freed, and take our rebirth in this divine realm of contentment. And so Ananda, in the sutra, he doesn't say okay, but I've kind of figured there's probably that little point. He goes, okay. And then he goes to the Buddha, and he prostrates in front of the Buddha, puts his head to the ground. And I like to imagine, although it's not in the sutra, this is what I like about the sutra's language being a little simple, is your imagination gets to be there too. I imagine that he's there on the ground. The sutra does say he's trembling. He's completely petrified. And the Buddha raises him up from the ground. And he looks into his face. He says, what? Ananda recounts the story. I was visited by this hungry ghost, flaming mouth, and this is what he told me. And he said that the only way I could overcome this karma is to do this impossible thing. And the Buddha says, don't worry. I have learned a method. I have learned a way to make these offerings. And furthermore, he says, I learned this method from the Bodhisattva of compassion, Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, that is the icon to the Buddha's right here on our altar. And I learned it in this other realm before I was born into this world. And so they gather the Sangha, and they perform this first ritual enactment of the Osegaki, or of this ritual, of this dharani, of this regard for the world, this orientation towards nourishment that unlocks this doors of really the gates of hell, is the way they're referred to in the ritual work. The gates that keep the hungry ghosts locked in that hell realm of the preta, or the hungry ghosts. That the Buddha knows how to open those gates. And they do it all together. He doesn't just teach Ananda and then Ananda goes back by himself and enact that. They do it as a whole group. And in that whole group, they're able to do something that Ananda's not allowed to do, able to do by himself. So many of you have heard that story many times. And I'm just curious, if when we look at that story, like we hear that story again and again, what's the teaching? Like, what does it tell you about greed? What does it tell you about your life? What does it tell you about how to deal with this difficult actuality that we are also marked by this kind of meanness and this sort of greed? I'm just curious, how's that been for you?
Well, you go beyond yourself, and we're busy not doing that.
Busy not going beyond ourselves.
Yes.
Yeah.
You don't have to take on that weight of dealing with it by yourself.
Yeah.
You have the whole community together to deal with it.
Yeah. Just an important point. Yeah.
I think it's terrifying for one thing. It's my favorite story of this particular ritual.
Yeah.
But I think somewhere in here it's about non-separation. because Ananda, anyone who listened to Hungry Ghost had held themselves separate.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, it's that joining and of that energy in ourselves.
Yeah, yeah. That he could actually meet Enku is a great kind of testament to Ananda's practice,
Right.
his life, his regard for his own being. I mean, how many times Enku's rapping on your door? Probably often. I know on mine, but I mostly don't notice, and or I slightly notice, and I don't really want to pay attention. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm a teacher,
Mm-hmm.
and I have difficult students,
Yeah.
and I'm trying to get them to do their work,
Yeah.
because I'm supposed to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I get irritated.
Yeah.
And this really reminds me of those moments when I just engage, connect with this compassion that they've got bigger fish to fry and there's stuff going on in there, and choose to connect instead of try to push them some arbitrary way that has nothing to do with their reality.
Yeah.
So it feels like a compassion, like what he said, stepping out of myself and my own agenda, and just choosing to be present with that human where they are.
Yeah. Beautiful. It's such a discipline. When I was a school teacher, I thought two things. I thought, how is anyone a school teacher without practice? And then I also thought, can anyone really practice if they're not a school teacher? Parents, yeah. I know people can, but I did think that because it pushes you right to the edge.
Oh yeah, because
I
I
mean-
do not want to do harm.
Yeah, exactly.
It brought me here, into it pushes my Zen practice all the time.
Yeah. That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Kojo-san,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I understand correctly, but like the word that also stood out to me was the compassion.
Mm-hmm.
For me, the way I understood it was like if you see this greed inside yourself, you meet this hungry ghost, like to acknowledge that and to not be further harming yourself, with shame, but to just be compassionate with this part of you as well as a gateway to further action.
Beautiful. It's this question about nourishment. We can give very easily over to a conception that nourishment is something which I could receive individually. That's the nature of nourishment, right? I need a certain amount of calories a day or whatever it is. I need less calories than I usually take, but that's our model of nourishment, not only physically, but psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, etc. And so in that kind of model, these troublemakers, it's sort of like, well, please get out of the way. Please stop being that, And we do want hungry ghosts to stop being hungry ghosts. We do want the freedom for the hungry ghosts. But what's going to actually bring that about? Is isolating them? Is just telling them they're evil, go away? Is that going to do it? The Mahayana teaching says no. Actually, they have to be transformed. If we're serious about our vow that all beings will be saved from suffering, then we have to see that these hungry ghosts will be too. So how do we deal with them? It's a very interesting thing. The word for hungry ghosts in Japanese is gaki. Guess what kids are also called? It's like a colloquial term for kid. You say gaki all the time, like all you little hungry ghosts, like that, right? But they're so wise and so beautiful and so aggravating, at the same time, especially if you're trying to make them do something. Yeah. So adults are too, but adults get more offended probably if we call them gaki. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think the thing that struck me in hearing the story this time is you were kind of speaking to it just now, but the permeability of the different realms and the way that things are knowledge or how to, or even just like our world is our world and we think it's our entire world, but then maybe the wisdom of the story is in kind of the movement between.
Yeah, beautiful. I think that's something, I'm glad you picked on that. That's something I've been trying to emphasize a little bit more, not because I think people don't get it, but it's just more alive in me. that it's like we either kind of reduce things to this kind of rational human realm way of thinking about it. And if we get away from that, when we might think, oh, there's different realms, but they're over there, and this is over here. But one thing in this Buddhist conception of this is they're not so in a different place, but they are maybe in a different way of regard. The way we regard them has to be different to be able to interact with them. And our psychology is pretty narrowed down to being able to perceive the fantastic. We're pretty shut down from that. Now, some places we can, like if you ever go to, I don't know if anyone's allowed to go there anymore, Blue Pool. You've been to? I mean, which is good. I think it's good they shut it down for too many people were going. When I first went, like no one went there. And then you come there, have people been there before? And you peer, and then you know that all of my little ways of trying to hold the world still and know what it is, just they kind of melt away. That was my experience anyway. Nice. Well, I want to invite you to this over these next couple of weeks as we are preparing for this large Seigaki ritual, to clue into these things. Think about them. How, on a conceptual level, like what's different here? What's happening in this? What would it mean for me to think about these beings that I might meet in a metaphorical way or in a literal way, as a psychological way? What if I met them with this little bit different spirit? What if I met them with a spirit of generosity, realizing that their nourishment is absolutely necessary to their liberation? And their nourishment and my nourishment and the nourishment of all the sages and seers and Buddhas and Bodhisattvas is all a wholeness, not simply how do I hold something that I need individually. What I need individually is not set apart from this. What I need individually is what I need individually, right? The point isn't to get rid of that. The point is that there's some wholeness in that we oftentimes are dividing out. It's either feed everyone or feed myself. I'm going to choose myself. Right? I also want you to clue into another thing. When we're working with these kinds of stories, oftentimes the teaching comes in the way we've been talking about now, where there's something arises in your conceptual thought. You may think like, oh wow, why am I so harsh in this certain point? Or why do I have a hard time bringing compassion to this situation? And this story tells me, oh, I need to in some way. How would it be if I changed the way that I'm approaching this a little bit? So that realm that's a very important realm to study on, and please do that. I also want you to watch for this other thing that might happen. As you pay attention to the story, if you're here sometimes enacting the ritual together or hearing more teachings about it, etc., there may be this kind of intimate meaning which will appear for you, or a kind of a significance. And that works a little bit different. It's a little bit like when I was talking about the orange persimmons at the beginning of this talk. Like you may see something in a different way and you just know. You know something in a different way. How you're seeing it is shifting a little bit. And that usually can't be so conceptually packaged. Okay? So I had to give you an example about how this works from my own life. A couple nights ago, I had a dream. I have like kind of crazy dreams a lot. But this dream really stuck with me. There was a period in my life where I really did a lot of work to try to remember my dreams, and now I don't so much, but sometimes they'll stick with me. And none of the imagery in the dream was particularly like associated with this sutra or this legend in a direct way, but I knew that it had something to do with it. And in this dream, I was with someone. I was with a student who was having a lot of troubles and was kind of making a lot of trouble. And I had taken them someplace to a wise woman who we met with, and she was going to help him with some things. And then in the dream, he's no longer around, and I'm there with this wise woman, and she says, "You are too harsh. You are too harsh." And she started to point out the way in which my heart is hardened. And then at one point, I sit down on the ground. She's on a little kind of a cushion, not quite a cushion, maybe like a recliner. And she's really kind of giving me a not quite a tongue lashing, but you know how some people can do this. Maybe your grandma's good at this, or somebody, the grandma. And she kind of just like and then she takes this purple top hat that's kind of covered with velvet, and she put the purple top hat on my head, and that's about what I remember. But as I woke up, I had this incredible feeling of tenderness. I just began to weep because I know I'm harsh. I know I have that in me. I know that kind of like cut Enku off and toss him to the lake of fire. I know that's in me. And it was like this moment where I could see that even that had to be enfolded and cared for. There was no way to banish this meanness. That it took something else. It took kindness, it took tenderness, it took compassion. And it was like a very visceral type of a feeling. So, part of those things, you don't try to make those things happen. That's not the point. And I would say that they probably are happening. The issue is, are you paying attention? And I don't mean, are you paying attention? I mean, are you saying, wow, I care about this. And I let it be in my life. I let it be in my way of thinking about the world. And I try to approach things with that kind of concern. Then when these sorts of, this purple velour, not velour, what do you call that? Velvet, purple hat. Like what? Who knows? I have some ideas actually, but I won't bore you with it. But this really will mean something to you. And these legends, these teachings, these practices, meditation, the rituals, all of them, that's part of what they're about, is to attune you to this part of your being, which cares for things. And if we went through everyone's stories here about those parts where you little thing, your story may be very meaningful to you, and everyone else goes, sweet, I get it, Hojo-san, purple hat. But I don't know. I don't know why that's important. You don't need to. Because it's mine. Right? That's my experience. Right? But your experience is equally as important and valid. And these all have these kind of teachings have the capacity to encourage you into that realm. The path is not linear progression. You're not going to try really, 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 really hard and just become a better and better and better and better bodhisattva and then boom. That's not how it works. Okay? It's more like circumambulating, which is really the most ancient way that humans have venerated something, is to walk around it. We don't do that so much anymore. Not yet. I'm hatching some plans. Downtown Eugene. But anyway, you're walking around and around. In Buddhism, we always walk clockwise from, if you were looking from the top. The right shoulder is bare. That's why with these kind of large Buddhist robes, we tie them this way so that the right shoulder is open, and we walk around in a very, very ancient way, through many, many, many cultures. And I just want you to think about that for a second. Like, at the center, there is this sacred thing which is ungraspable. There is some heart of compassion. There is the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara in all of her splendor. And we walk around We don't just try to walk to her. We walk around, and that's our path. Because the center is ungraspable, you try to go there directly. You go like this. You can't, and it all disappears. We're walking with this deep concern for what is that ungraspable heart? What is that? And how do I care for it? And each one of the steps in that case is a step of that question and a step of that care for what is there at the center. What is it that we put at the center? What do we regard to be the most important? And because Ananda knew how to do that, the face of Avalokiteshvara that shows up as a hungry ghost and says, remember your vow? In many schools, Enku is considered to be an emanation of Avalokiteshvara. Enku is an emanation of the Bodhisattva of compassion. There's a beautiful, I like to make a copy of it sometime or get someone to make a similar version, is the Enku, the hungry ghost, seated just like a Buddha. There's a scroll, seated just like a Buddha, and his chest is all kind of transparent. You can see the flame moving all through his chest, his eyes. Wow! And he's Buddha, and Avalokiteshvara is right here above his head, in a little tuft of clouds, which iconographically is always telling you the main being. Where are they coming from? They're coming from Avalokiteshvara. So think about that circle. It's not that Enku is just a problem. Enku is actually compassion. And that wheel is the wheel that we're caring for, that we're walking, that we're exploring through our own life. We say at the beginning of a Dharma talk, the sutra opening verse that we read, the last line there say, may we unfold the meaning of the Tathagata's truth. It's interesting. It doesn't say, may we unfold the Tathagata's truth. The Tathagata is another way to say Buddha, the thus come one. So it doesn't say, we're going to unfold the Tathagata's truth. The Tathagata's truth is completely unfolded, right? But the meaning of it, the significance, that's another way to read that character that's translated there as meaning, is significance. What's the significance of the Tathagata's truth? That's my job, is to unfold that significance. That's your job, to unfold that significance. And we call that unfolding the path. No? So the arrival is not the point. Right? You're already there, but are you going to investigate the center in this very subtle way? That's the invitation and the kind of challenge, because you can't just go, straight to it. Okay, so we'll talk more about that later. Next week and the week after that, and then on the November 3rd, that will be the ritual. And I really encourage you to, if you're able to make the time to come to that ritual. It's sort of our most big and colorful ritual, but also deeply important. And then we always have lunch together afterwards. So there'll be delicious Indian food to share together afterwards. So if you can make a little bit extra time on that day to stay afterwards and have lunch together, it's really this will be our 22nd Segaki, I believe. Yeah. So we're getting up there. That's the advantage to getting old.